Hi everyone, this is Chrissy with a Photoshop tutorial, and today we're going to be doing a quick text effect. Now, no matter what you do in Photoshop, whether you're a photographer or a designer or whatever floats your boat, at some point you're going to want to make some text, and sometimes you're going to want to fancy that text up a little bit. Now, this file here, we just have a few layer effects put onto it and a few background layers. It's pretty quick to make. Then I'm going to show you how to save it as a style so that you can use the effect again. So let's get started. We're going to open a new file, and I'm just using 1152 by 864. We're going to hit OK. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to fill this with a color. See, I'm just going to use a blue color here that I've picked with my color picker and hit OK. Now I'm going to duplicate that layer, Command J. And we're going to put a gradient overlay from their effects panel, set it to soft light, and have a radial gradient. And reverse that. I'm just going to change the angle just a little bit to make it a little bit wider here. So if you can see what's happening there, that's just making our circle a little bit bigger and a little bit softer. I'm just going to bring the scale up just a touch too to make that lighter part even a little bit bigger. And we'll hit OK. Now what we're going to do next is I'm just going to use a blank layer. We're going to take our brush tool. We're going to come over here to our brush palette. Now you might notice here, right now I'm using Photoshop CS6. Now this is a beta trial. If you're not using CS6 yet, this will all still work in CS5 and CS4 as far as I know as well. Now with our brush, we're going to pick a nice soft brush. We're going to come to the shape dynamics. First thing I'm going to do, we're going to go back to brush tip shape. We're going to up our spacing on this. So you can see we got all separate dots. Back to our shape dynamics, and we're going to change the size jitter, say to about 69%. Minimum diameter, we're going to change a little bit too. Angle jitter, we're also going to change. And the roundness, the angle jitter isn't really going to matter while it's still a circle, but once you change that, the roundness jitter, it is going to. Now we're also going to put on our color dynamics. So we're going to click on our foreground color, and we're just going to choose the light blue. I'm going to drag this up to make it a little bit lighter. And then on our background, and we're going to choose the darker blue. Make it a little bit darker. And I'm going to make my brush larger. And we're just going to paint randomly in here to start. There's something like that. There you go, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And we're going to give that a blur of about 73. I'm going to duplicate that layer. Filter, blur, and motion blur. And we're going to give that a pretty high motion blur. And our layer under it, we're also going to give it a motion blur. But not quite as high. Go back up to our top layer, and I'm going to hit Command, Alt, Shift, E, which is going to paste a new layer on top. Now what that did is it just took all of these layers we had and made them as one on top. It's kind of like flattening your image without getting rid of all your crap underneath. Now we're going to go to our filter gallery. Now if you're using CS5, this is set up a little bit differently, but it's all still there. We're going to go under Artistic. We're going to use Watercolor. Now I have my brush detail set all the way, my shadow intensity to 0, and my texture is at 1. We're just going to hit OK. Then we're going to duplicate that layer. We're going to go back to the filter gallery, do plastic wrap. And we want to keep that highlight fairly low. And just turn down the detail a little bit. And keep that nice and smooth. Now I'm going to turn down the opacity on this layer. to about 55. The opacity on this layer, about 40. Just bring this down a little bit further. Now we're going to do a slight vignette around the outside there. And I really enjoy doing vignettes with the levels tool. So I'm going to pull up my levels. And I'm going to take my white tip slider here and I'm just going to pull it down just a little bit. And then my mid-tone slider, I'm going to pull it so it's a little bit darker. I go back to my layer. I grab my square marquee tool. And I'm just going to draw out a random square here. This doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to fill that with black. And you can see my foreground color here is black. And I'm just going to hit Alt-Delete, and that's going to fill it. Command D to deselect. And I'm going to double click on my mask, and it's going to bring me over to my properties here. We're just going to bring up our feathering quite a bit. Now let's get started on our text. Now I'm using a text called Dear Joe 4. I can't remember where I got it, but any text is going to work with this. I just kind of like this one. I have my text set to 300 points. I'm just going to tap in here, and you can write whatever you want. I'm going to center this in the page, and that's really easy to do. We have our text layer selected. I'm going to scroll down to my background layer and command click it. So now both are selected. If we go to the Move tool, I'm going to click this one to align it through the horizontally and this one to align it vertically, and we're in the center. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my fill down to 0. Now fill controls how much of everything you see here, where opacity, you'll notice, opacity does pretty much the same thing, but if you use your opacity instead of your fill, our layer styles aren't going to show up. When we turn the fill to 0, we won't see whatever we have painted or typed here, but we will see our layer styles. So the first layer style we're going to do is an inner shadow. We're going to change the color to one of our darker blues here, right about there. We're going to change this to normal and at 100% opacity. Our choke we're going to turn up to 13. And the size to about 21. Now this is where we're going to get those cool dots. We're going to turn the noise up to 14. Now you can see we kind of got a noisy texture in here that's really kind of pretty. So next we're going to do an inner glow. We're going to also use a dark blue on this. We're going to change that to multiply, keeping our opacity at 75%. I'm going to turn the choke up to about 22. And we're going to keep that at 5. Now we're going to do a satin. We're going to change our satin to screen. And instead of that, we're going to pick a nice light color here. Maybe just even a little bit lighter than that. So now we're starting to get those highlights in there. Everything else we're going to keep the same here. Now we're going to do an outer glow. Again, we're going to pick a nice light blue color. I'm going to turn that up to 100%. I'm going to bring the spread up to about 23. And now while you're doing this, you're just eyeballing what's going on the page, and if you like it or not. Bring the size up just a little bit too, maybe do about 8. Now we're just going to do a drop shadow on this as well. Now here's a little tip for you. When you're doing a drop shadow, never use black. Okay? You're always going to grab the darkest color of what your background is and a little bit darker than that. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to again pick this nice dark color. We're going to change the angle on this to about 80. We're going to bring this up to 6. Now what we're going to do here is we're just going to say OK to accept that for the moment. We're going to make a new layer underneath. We're just going to add a little more style to this now. I'm going to take our ellipse tool and I'm just going to draw a circle in behind my file here. To fill it with white, Command D to deselect, and we're going to blur this, the Gaussian blur, right about there, about 48.7. Now Control T, and we can make this bigger or smaller and customize it just a little bit more. And I'm going to turn the opacity down on this, not too much, otherwise it'll start looking grayish in the middle. Go back to our effects for a moment. Now in order to save this as a style, we're going to say New Style. You're going to give it a name, which is called My Text. And hit OK. Now under our style palettes up here, if this doesn't show up here, it's going to come up to Window. And you're just going to find Styles on here. And it'll pop it up for you. Now you can see here it saved our style. So what we're going to do now to show you how that works is I'm just going to go back to my brush tool for a moment. I'm going to turn the shape dynamics off. We're going to turn the spacing back down. I'm going to pick a nice hard brush. Actually, I'm going to turn the shape dynamics back on. I'm going to turn all of these off. I'm just going to make my brush size a little bit smaller as well, say about 14. I'm going to make a new layer and grab my pen tool, and I'm just going to draw just a little line under here. I'm going to right click, stroke path, simulate pressure. You can see under here tool, it says brush, and what that means is that it's using the brush tool in order to stroke the path. You can also use any other of these tools. Usually use a brush though. I'm going to hit OK. I'm just going to delete this path out of here. Now if we click our style, you can see that it's going to style it exactly the same as our letters. We could also take a shape, like I have the polygonal tool, sorry. If I drag this out, it's also going to have our style. Now in order to finish this up, I'm just going to put one more layer here. I'm going to back this down a little bit. I'm going to grab my paintbrush again. Turn the shape dynamics off completely. I'm going to grab my brush. Black is my foreground color, and I'm going to get my brush nice and big. And I'm just going to paint around the outside here. This doesn't have to be really exact, and I know you're thinking right now that this looks terrible, but that's okay because we're not done yet. I'm going to change my blending mode to soft light, and then we're going to blur this. And just turn the opacity down. And there we go. We have a really neat text effect that we can use again on text or shapes or lines. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial today, and good luck photoshopping. Thank you.